The AUG or the M16? Now this is the question we're going to answer inside this video, and we're going to compare both of the weapons and their stats together to see which one of these two burst rifles is the best inside Cold War. If you're interested in keeping up to date with stat breakdowns and weapon comparisons of all the guns inside Cold War, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as we're going to try and reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so definitely support us in doing that. We'll be covering a lot more Cold War content in the coming days and weeks, as well as when Cold War shifts over into Warzone. Both the M16 as well as the AUG inside Cold War are burst rifle weapons, and I think this is going to be a really important category, especially when shifting over into Warzone. There's not a category like this with the tactical rifles already in the game, but currently we're going to talk about multiplayer and how these two weapons stack up. This video is going to give you a breakdown of the stats. Like I said, it's not going to be completely in-depth. That's going to come soon with weapon guides that we're going to make later on in this week. This is just to give you a quick overview of how both weapons perform. If you watched our previous video, you'll know that in my opinion, I think the M16 is the better of the two weapons. On the screen here, you'll see the class setups we use for both of these guns. On the M16, we have the Millstop Reflex. Again, I love this sight. I think it's one of the best sights in the entire game. Then for the barrel, we have the Rapid Fire barrel. This gives you an increase to your rate of fire without any cons, and I'll explain later why we chose this barrel over some of the others. For the underbarrel, we use the Field Agent grip. Now this is one of the best grips in the game for controlling recoil. After that, we then use the 45 round mags. Now this is just the standard 45 round mags. It does increase the time it takes for you to reload, but the distances you should be using this gun, you should have a bit of time to fit in a reload every now and again. For the handle, we then use the speed tape, but you can also use the drop shot wrap. Again, the drop shot wrap's a great option for pretty much every gun in the game. There's a lot of barrel attachments for the M16 and the AUG, and I've broken them down later on in this video, and I'll explain why I used these ones here. Moving on to the attachments for the AUG now, we can see that I use the Millstop Reflex once again. Like I said, it's my favourite sight. If you prefer something else, feel free to use that here. Then we use the titanium barrel. Again, I'll explain later on why we use this barrel. But what this gives you is an increase to your rate of fire, and then it reduces your damage range by a little bit as well. For the underbarrel, again, we have the Field Agent foregrip. Again, this is one of the best for controlling recoil, hence why I have it on this gun too. Next, we have the 45 round mags, and this is the standard 45 round mags. Again, this is a similar class setup to the M16. And then after that, we use the speed tape again, but again, you can use the drop shot tape if you find yourself in a bit more close quarters fights and finding the need to drop shot enemies. So again, this is my personal opinion. You could use these guns with different attachments and still do really well with it, but these are the ones I found work well for me. You could also use the Gunfighter wildcard to add 3 more attachments, but I think for each of these weapons, these are the 5 base attachments you should start with and then build from that. On the screen here, you'll see some of the stats for both of the guns. The M16 on the left, the AUG on the right. Green is just some highlight areas I want to show you. Blue is with the attachments added, and white is just the base weapon. Some of these stats were taken directly from the game, and some we had to calculate ourselves as well. But for the M16 as well as the AUG, they're both a 1 to 2 shot burst kill depending on the range you're at. If you're within the damage range of 25.4 for the M16, you'll get a 1 shot burst to the upper chest or headshots. And then for the AUG, if you're within the damage range of 38.10, then you'd be able to get a 1 shot burst to the upper body or headshots, and then a 2 shot burst after that. So with the barrels I recommended with both of the guns, you actually get the rate of fire to 1034 for both the AUG as well as the M16, and that also brings the time to kill down to 116 milliseconds for both of the guns as well. Now keep in mind, this is within that 1 burst kill range. This is not extending out of that 2 burst kill range. It's going to be a slightly higher time to kill there. What you can see is that the time to kill for both the AUG as well as the M16 is really low, especially if you're in that 1 burst kill range. Especially with the attachments on, this is pretty much half of what you'd get with a regular assault rifle. Now once you extend this to the 2 burst kill range, it's about 350 milliseconds on average between the M16 and the AUG with all the barrels, so this is very similar to some of the assault rifles. In terms of ADS speed, mag size, and even the ADS speed after you add the attachments on, this is all exactly the same for both guns. On top of that, the reload times are very similar as well. However, the bullet velocity as well as the damage range with the AUG is actually better than the M16. The M16's damage range is going to be the same as it was for the base weapon, and that's because the attachment we added didn't affect the damage range, whereas for the AUG it did, and it reduced the damage range, so that brings it down to 28.57, which is still a bit longer than what we get with the M16. From the looks of things overall, the AUG does perform slightly better than the M16 because it has a slightly longer damage range for its damage drop-off points. However, this doesn't paint the full picture, but before we take a look into the recoil patterns as well as the hipfire accuracy on both of these two guns, both of these guns have a few barrel options that change the rate of fire as well as the damage profiles, and as you would expect, this would also change the time to kill values for both of the guns too. So on the screen here, you can now see the 4 different barrels that actually affect either rate of fire, damage, or both. So we have the rapid fire barrel, the strike team barrel, the titanium barrel, and also the task force barrel is what you're seeing on the screen just now. Now, some of the barrels such as the task force barrel as well as the strike team barrel affect damage. And when you look at the stats in game, it's going to show you that the damage has been increased to a certain value, and it's true that the damage has actually increased, but in terms of the ranges you will be using these guns at, and keep in mind I'm only talking about that 1 burst kill range, the damage doesn't actually make a difference in this case because it's still going to be a 3-shot kill or a 1 burst kill, even though the damage has been increased. So that's why the rapid fire barrel performs really well here, because the rate of fire has been increased even though the damage hasn't, but it still brings the time to kill down. But if you look at the task force barrel, that did increase the damage on both of the guns, but it doesn't actually affect the time to kill in any way if you compare it to the base weapon. It just pretty much extends out your damage range. Now, there is other barrels that perform even better for extending your damage range. Now, this might sound completely useless for the task force barrel, but actually when you start to use these guns at even further ranges, those slight increases to damage profile will help you. So something like the task force barrel could be very useful in either Fireteam, Warzone, or even just some of the larger maps. I went for a more balanced approach, so I get a lower time to kill as well as a decent damage range, and most of your gunfights inside regular multiplayer are going to be close to mid-range gunfights. But like I said, these barrels could come in handy for other game modes. This is only for the 1 burst kill range. If you want to see how this extends out to further damage ranges, then stay tuned for our gun guide videos that are coming very soon. So now it's coming down to almost personal preference. The guns have a very similar time to kill, very similar damage ranges, very similar reload times and handling stats as well. So of course, as always, it's always going to come down to the recoil patterns for both of the guns. So with the recoil charts on the screen here, you can see that we have the M16 in green, the AUG in blue. On the left, it's with no attachments. On the right is with the recommended attachments from earlier on in this video. And honestly, even though we use that foregrip to control recoil, there's not a huge amount of recoil being controlled here because these are burst weapons that are already pretty accurate in the first place. Personally, I think the M16 actually benefits more from these recoil controlling attachments than the AUG does. All of these tests were done at the exact same ranges, so it's pretty much very similar across the board for the recoil patterns, whereas the M16 does perform a little bit better with the attachments. Both of these burst fire weapons are really easy to control. However, if you do struggle with recoil control, the M16 with the attachments is the better option. The last thing we need to take a look into is the hipfire accuracy for both of these guns. And again, as you can see on the screen here, nothing much separates two of the guns. I would like to say that the M16 performs slightly better here, especially on the right hand side chart. It does look like with the attachments added there's some tighter grouping. Being honest, they're both pretty bad, and I wouldn't recommend hip firing with either one of these two guns. Of course, if you added on a 5mm laser, for example, this would tighten the grouping of the hip fire. But if you're thinking about the main use case for these guns, they're medium to long range tactical rifles, and you should have a secondary weapon like a shotgun to deal with those close range gunfights. Now, even after comparing both of these guns side by side, nothing much separates the two guns, whether it comes to time to kill, recoil, or anything at all. Even the handling stats are very similar too. So it's very weird how they added two guns in the game that are pretty much the same. And even though you extend these damage ranges out to further distances, The rate of fire is always going to be higher on the M16, whereas the damage will always be higher on the AUG, and therefore it's just going to be very equal even at those further distances. My personal preference is the M16, and that's just because I think the recoil pattern is slightly better, especially when you're firing at longer ranges. And even after comparing both of these guns side by side, I find it really hard to recommend one over the other. I think it's just definitely going to come down to personal preference in this case. If I had to recommend one, I would just recommend the M16 because I prefer that gun, but there's not any evidence to suggest that it's actually better. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave us a like as it helps us get recommended to more people. On top of that, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe, as we're going to be bringing out a lot more weapon comparisons as well as weapon guides in the coming days, and if any of the stats changes, we will pin them in a comment down below. Thank you very much for watching.